super spreaders. We are doing what we're doing here. Everybody's wearing a mask.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fifth workshop of Art Teks, Fractal Poetics, and Glitch Language. If you're joining me, feel free to comment and say hello. Before we get started, I first want to say that this workshop series is possible in part due to funds from Queen's Council on the Arts New Works Grant. So let's get started.
But I have made no judgment. My words I've made no judgment. We're just a group of serious constitutional scholars have a number of ideas how we should proceed from this point on. And
so Fractal Poetics and Glitch Language. So Fractal Poetics, the concept was created by poet Alice Fulton. And I just wanted to share a few quotes from her essay about fractal poetics that I think is applicable to the discussion today. When I happened upon fractals, I thought they offered a good analog to free verse, a dynamic, turbulent form between perfect chaos and perfect order. Fractals offered a way to imagine and construct answers to questions about structure that, for good or ill, dominated the discussion of the day. In 1986, I published my first essay on fractal poetics, a formal, free, and fractal verse, singing the body eclectic. I believe the poet's purpose is to revise language into a vehicle of unsettlement capable of dismantling assumptions that suppress justice and contaminate love. In practice, this means poets must risk their necks in the name of fairness, i.e., equity and beauty, rather than play it safe. I hate this requirement of poetry, but it is the only justification for spending one's life in league with it. In poetry, the optimum might be analogous to the sublime. Rather than a single transcendent lyric ultimate, complexity suggests a sublime that happens here and there as part of the ongoing, a plurality of optimums in between other textures and gestures. Moreover, the eternal process of complex systems, their continual unfolding and surprise, suggests a maximalist aesthetic large enough to include background as well as foreground. The poetics I've termed fractal is concerned with the discarded details, overlooked aspects of structure, and more importantly, the dark matter of content. Knowledges that remain unspoken because to attend to them would be inconvenient, if not dangerous. In such a way, the tenets of complexity theory can suggest ethical as well as aesthetic dimensions. Nature is slippery, a neither nor. Light cannot be both particle and wave, yet it is. The two categories dismantle one another, exposing the limitations of the classical framework. Science is not the product of interaction between two well-differentiated entities, nature and culture. Rather, it flies in the face of any matter-meaning dichotomy. As Barad sees it, subjects and objects both have agency without having the utopian, symmetrical, wholesome dialogue, outside of human representation posited by objectivist accounts. She proposes not some holistic approach in which subject and object reunite, but a theory which insists on the importance of constructed boundaries and also the necessity of interrogating and refiguring them. Poetry is an absorbent art. Maybe it can include other fields more readily than they can include it. In any case, it doesn't have to defend itself or be for something. It isn't obviously pragmatic. It's playful, having qualities of the joke in that the point happens between the lines. It also has the famous elegance of good science. Writing poetry is probably the best way to teach people to love language and words. So you see from the quotes in Fulton's essay, she mentions how fractal poetics allows space for in-betweenness, for slipperiness, for the neither nor and the both and. It can absorb, like poetry, it can absorb many pluralities. And I think that best fits the idea that I want to bring up about glitch poetics and glitch language. So my family is from the Caribbean, and as you may know, in the Caribbean, we speak Creole languages. Oftentimes, Creole languages is seen as broken languages, and they're called broken languages because they're seen as a broken form of the more standardized Romance languages like English, French, Spanish. But I want to think of Creole language a little bit differently as more of a poetic languages that allow for and absorb different cultures and different philosophies into one body of language. And here's the definition. You have Creole language is a systemized vernacular language developed from a mixture of different languages. So a hybrid in-between form, similar to what Fulton mentions about fractal poetics. And also etymology is an important part of my practice. So looking up the etymology of glitch, you have the root in Yiddish words for to slip or to glide on a glossy surface. And so glitch becomes a kind of dance or movement across space. So thinking of language as not this static thing, but something that's constantly moving and refiguring itself. And speaking of gloss, we can think of words like glossary and glossolalia, which is speaking in tongues. So having the ability to speak multiple languages is kind of like being able to speak in tongues, right? And when we think of foreigners or we think of people who've immigrated to different countries, how those who are considered native to those countries can sometimes be discriminatory about people who speak different languages, and their languages are seen as othered and seen as not as beneficial or useful as the native languages in those countries. So I describe glitch language as a kind of linguistic dance or negotiating of various spaces within one body through formulating new languages. And in another sense, it could be seen as a type of proprioception, which is considered a sixth sense outside of the five senses that we have. So looking at glitch language, one of the poets that came to mind was Ana-Maurine Lara's work, Kohnjehr Woman. And as you can see, the spelling of Kohnjehr Woman is different from the standardized spelling of Konjure. And that is an important thing to keep in mind looking at the work in the book. And reading the work in the book, it reminded me of I think it's the Greek myth of Philomela, who was raped by her brother-in-law in the story. And in order to prevent her from speaking about the rape, he cuts out her tongue. But what she does is she ends up telling the story through weaving a textile together to show what happened to her. And so it made me think of like the idea of losing one's tongue, but reconstructing language to still be able to tell one's story. So the main character in this book is named She, and her tongue is also cut out. And you'll see in the poems that I will show you how she finds a different way to speak, and she finds empowerment through that speaking, and speaking her voice in her own way in that recontextualized language. So let's look at a few of the poems. So you might not be able to see some of the poems, but I will read them. The first poem here is the first poem in the book. And if you read the poem on the page, you'll see that it's actually kind of hard to decipher what's being said because the language is written differently than standardized English. It's written in a kind of creole language, but if you read it out loud, you can kind of start deciphering what's being said. And it reminds me of tonal languages, right? The idea that sound can have many possibilities, including possibilities in spellings, right? And thinking of Kohnjehr woman, the various possibilities in spellings is the various possibilities in spells and spell work, right? So I will read the first poem out loud. Odorily is the river. Them chains, them chains, them chains. The river has more strong than them chains. Odoro is the river. The river will take your mo fists than them mesa. Then the river will call your mo deep than the wheps. Ororo is the river. Them chains, them chains, them chains. The river has more strong than them chains. Them caught me wands, they kill me to Thames, me still kill back. Still kill back to fend them. Hen huen mi kun me show them to the river over. Odola es the river. Them chains, them chains, them chains, them chains, her broke kin. And I'm still trying to decipher what some of the words are, but like the orderly part, just listening to the sound, it sounded like the actual sound the river was making. And when you look at the glossary at the back of the book, that's actually what orderly is. And so again, the idea of sound giving the meaning without having to know exactly what the word is. And in the next poem on the right side, we have Passing, which tells the story of what happened to She. But also the title Passing, the sense of movement, right? This figure that is slippery, that is constantly moving through space. Coming back from the field, the sun red as coal burning in the big house furnace, I turned and saw She, shackled ankles, wrists raw and swollen, remnants of a cloth dress flailing around cracked indigo skin. They say she is African. They say she conjured the death of Blancs in Sandoman. They say they cut she tongue out. She searched my face in passing, caught my eyes with she eyes, dark as winter soil. This next poem is called Prayer. So these are other characters in the book, Samuel and Rebecca, and Samuel is listening to Rebecca say a prayer. Rebecca says she is watching. Oh, and by the way, these characters are enslaved people during slavery times. Rebecca says she is watching stars, learning the names of the constellations. She says the stars speak truth in the darkness before sunrise. She sits down by the river before the day is started. There's a rock there. You see, they say the rock is holy, that if you pray there long enough, the light between the trunks of trees reveals its songs. The river pounds the drums. And I think this poem is also important in terms of the idea of a plurality of language, right? What are the ways that nature speaks that isn't the same as, again, these standardized forms of languages that we're told is the proper way to speak? Like, what are all the alternative ways to speak? The poem on the right side is from she, and it's once again her speaking in her kind of glitchy language. Me not sorry. What you want me to tell you? That me sorry? That me gon' change? Me not sorry, me not sad, me not gon' change. 'Cause it ain't me that got the IHOP. 'Cause it ain't me that got the lesh round me tongue. Me not gon' whip na. Charles, friend up your tongue, freen up your tongue, gon' just change ya. So in that poem, you see she's mentioning the idea that her tongue is free. And so she's not sorry because she can speak freely, while the person she's talking to, their tongue is not free. And so she's commenting on the idea of like colonial language not being free language. This next poem is Victuals, and it's conversation between Samuel and his ancestors, but also includes she speaking as well. My own mama was a conjure woman, and I dare say people didn't know what to make of her either. I told she just like that one Sunday when we found ourselves walking through the same stretch of road leading into the same stretch of forest. She ain't got a tongue, but we understand each other. Anyway, she stood shadowing my face, she eyes searching. You ain't got not good alter for your sanj kudzo. She wrinkled her nose at the air around for my shoulder, turned onto the forest path. She found me at the shack at sunset, 3 large rocks colored red with the blood. She said, "Nah, you got the equa." Late at night, she come back, make sure I'm okay. You hit? She asked, a bowl of corn pone in her hands. I nodded, and she walked away, leaving a mound of food at my doorstep. Her back to me, saying these, "For you, Sanj, then, this for you, Pepin." She voice sweet rain coating my earth's awaken. And here Samuel is describing she as kind of conjuring something up in him, right, through her voice, through her speaking. And he says how, like, she doesn't have a tongue, but we understand each other anyway, that, like, despite her broken language, they still can understand each other through that brokenness, because there's something ancient in that language there. And next poem we have is Changes. And this is another character, Sarah, who's tasting water. The water tastes different ever since they brought that Kohnjehr woman up from the islands. She don't talk like the rest of us up over here. No, she speak a funny sort of grunt. They say she tongue cut out the last place she been for conjuring up a murder. That's why they sell she, they say. Ain't ever seen old Nate scared of nobody before. Ain't never tasted iron in the water. This next poem is Sarah again. And Sarah and Nate, I believe, are the slave mistress and master in the book. Roots. Nah, don't like she. Don't like her at all. The way her mouth move. Every time she pass by me, it's like the earth move in a different direction. Shells ain't not Juan gone speak you what you got to speak. Ain't not one set you Pepin gone show you. You foot on Beckfest gels. You walk Beckfest. Roots grow upside down. The sun set backwards. My hair don't know which way to fall. Walk fair no nough. You gon' reek the waters. Walk fair not. You gon' reach the trot. The earth is rising up in the sky. So as you can see, with she, because of the way she personally speaks, she has a power in her own language that frightens those who have power. It frightens the mistress, it frightens the master, because she speaks her own language. And here we have River Stones. Rebecca searches the indigo for her mama. Indigo mirror of mama. Do you hear it? Long time she listened, eyes obsidian, cold, I turn. Do you hear the wren? Knocking on the roof, knocking, gets the door. Head cocked against memory, April rain. Mama? Listen. Do you hear it? Do you hear the rain? Rod, Auden, Huend, Don Struder, Ibwa, shaken head, shaken body, ain't no use, I say. She quiet, trickle. Mama? Melting snow. The rain speak you, Okan. You haunt no? My hand deep into the water, burning cold silver, deep under the water, fingertips rocks along the riverbed, rush of water, dead deep in slumber. Mama? Prayers jumping for air, she words, singing. Listen, chairs, listen. My lips parted for song. Dem Mars from Guinan call out, swans fall. So just similar to Samuel, Rebecca listening to she reminds her of her ancestors, reminds her of her traditional language. And although the language is a form of Creole, the way it sounds calls her back to home, right? It calls her back to a space that existed before her people were taken into slavery.
Thank you for helping protect our children.
Yeah, so as you can see in Anna's work, the creoleness is a hybrid form that is obviously showing the collision of English as well as the tonal languages of West Africa, of Eastern languages, and that fusion together is syncretic. It's hiding the ancient languages underneath the colonized languages, and so it's in a sense slipping through, and that's kind of the glitchiness of it, and that kind of glitchiness that threatens those who are in power. So that kind of glitchiness we can also see in Alain Paelez Lopez's book Intergalactic Travels, Poems from a Fugitive Alien. Intergalactic Travels, Poems from a Fugitive Alien is an intimate poetic portrait about growing up undocumented in the United States. In this debut collection, Alain Pelaez Lopez urges readers to question their inheritance and acceptance of settler rage, settler fear, and settler citizenship, so that alternative worlds can be imagined and actualized. Lopez is an Afro-Indigenous poet, undocumented poet from, I think it's called Osaka, Mexico. And a lot of their work looks at how, despite being of indigenous descent, they're considered an immigrant and the kind of complexities of that. So, going to go to their poems.
Closed captioning is sponsored by Raymour & Flanagan. Find it, feel it, furnish it fast.
Opioids are destroying too many lives and families. So ask Nicole.
First, I want to share the page from the operating system where you can get the book, as well as find the poems that are available in various publications.
She's never been for you. She's a fraud. House Majority PAC's responsible for the content disasters.
Okay.
How can I afford good health care? What will I do if my family gets sick?
Okay.
Sun River Health.
So this first poem
Since 1975,
is called NDN Travel. NDN is I think it's an abbreviation for indigenous. And so the title is kind of an oxymoron of you're indigenous, but also traveling and migrating, and the kind of complexities of crossing over to a space that you already belong to. So let's read the poem. I am a specialist in what we call border crossing. I can cross a border anytime you ask, from my faggy little body and my history of abuse to my Indian roots. I can swim any river, sea. I do every day. I had the luxurious wings once, but they came and cut them. Then the air sopló and created an injury. The waves of the water weakened them, and the amnesia of history exhausted them. Now, I can no longer cross borders. My lungs, alma, and mind can no longer swim. So I had to hop, saltar, and play, hide, and seek in what was once my land. So, as you can see in the poem, Lopez crosses out the first section of the poem to kind of show the hidden history of their indigenous roots, that they're, as well as their the plurality of themselves, right? That they were able to move freely as a person who was originally on the land, right? They could slip and fly and move like water wherever they wanted to go. And then with colonization, they can no longer cross borders, right? Because the borders that are set up are not boundaries that they've created. It's boundaries that others have created for them. But Lopez writes at the end that they have to figure out a new way to dance, right? So they have to hop, they have to saltar and play and hide and seek. So they're renegotiating the space in what was once their land. And also in the poem, you see that they include various other language words like soplo, alma, saltar. And Lopez continues this idea of crossing in their other poems. And also when we think of the word crossing, it reminds me of the term cross-dressing, and the idea that here's this person who has indigenous roots, but they kind of have to put on this costume of being a migrant or being an immigrant in a land that technically they already originally belonged to. So this kind of costuming and playing of language in their work. So Guide to Border Crossing Self. 1. The training. Mi amor, you better learn to run without shoes, forget what it feels like to tie laces, do not practice the ritual of bow too many times, for you will forget that you are in danger. The crossing. Corazoncito, when you get to the fence, you must run. You must not look back. You must run faster than ever. Pretend you are back in El Pueblo and you have just picked a bean of coffee from the gringos that enslaved your family. Run as if they have seen you. Run to safety before they hunt you like a deer. Run before they lasso your bodies, traffic you to America, KK, lynch you at the White House. Kohnjehr. 3. The survival. Mijo, the life you must save is your own. You have thousands of hearts beating through your blood system. You may feel alone, but you are not. Deep inside your skin, you have the resistance of Indian and Black warriors. You will fight all the way. You will take every beam of sunlight. You will take any bit of water offered, and you will always burst new roots. You cannot be killed. Life is in your body. It is in your words, in your existence. Yes, in this poem, again, the idea of constantly moving, this figure that is not settled anywhere, but is constantly on the run, constantly migrating, constantly moving. And in that constant moving, there's also the plurality of self, right? The thousands of hearts beating through your blood system. And this also speaks back to Lara's work, in which the enslaved people are speaking to their ancestors through listening to their cultural languages. Okay, so let's go to their next poem.
34-year-old Brandon Adams intentionally set that fire.
Police arrested a homeless 32-year-old man for throwing eggs at two police officers during yesterday's protest in Times Square. Devin Harris was charged with assaulting a police officer and resisting arrest. Police say at least 7 people were arrested yesterday when anti-Trump demonstrators confronted.
So this poem is no translation necessary. I notice Mama Maria look at me funny every time I open mi bocada. I know it is because I lost my accent. Those gringos sometimes tell me I slur my words. Mama Maria tells me that though she does not understand the language, she needs no translation. For the people that speak it are always sad. How ugly this English is. And I like this poem because it highlights the multiple ways of speaking, right? That there's this kind of surface level speech, and then there's the subtext under it, right? That there's the way we communicate with English, but underneath the communication of English, there's this feeling of sadness under it that doesn't need to be translated. It's easily understood. And Lopez also writes how they themselves, writes as the speaker, that they're in betweenness, right? That they're losing their accent because they are hybrid with the gringo language, the English language. So the multiple ways that one is engaging with these multiplicity of languages and the multiplicity of meanings of these languages.
This is just the beginning, and I look forward to seeing more.
Yeah, so let's go to their last works.
Solutions like Madeline's. The project was a partnership between the MTA, the Transit Innovation Partnership, and the New York City Department of Transportation.
So this one is called Sick in America. And once again, Lopez is using the concept of crossing. Before the crossing, our family could understand the whispers of the water. We bathed our cuerpos morenos as if we were holy, as if our humanity was valuable, as if we were worth life. It is hard to remember anything before the crossing. How do I tell myself I had a childhood if at the age of 5 I am a fugitive of the law? It would be easier to remember life before the crossing if we didn't become paralyzed for the rest of our lives. The doctors tell me I have post-traumatic stress disorder. He says it is because I am an immigrant, but that in a few years I will be American. And here they have several footnotes. So 1, during the crossing, we were faced with the reality of what it means to be Black and Indian in an empire that constantly measures us on production, and production. Our blood, a sustenance for those who deem us illegal. 2, the water here has been cut through by wooden logs that demand we show them papers that say we are not poor, nor Indian, or Black. 3, I only crossed once. Location, San Diego, Tijuana border, age 5, how, by foot and car. But every story heard becomes another crossing. My body remembers every crossing. Every crossing becomes mine. My body has experienced every crossing in dreams. 4, fugitive. An American Indian border school runaway. Fugitive runaway slave. Fugitive runaway soon-to-be lynched Negro. Fugitive Asada Shakur. Fugitive Mike Brown. Fugitive Sandra Bland. Fugitive Alan Carlos Paelez Lopez. 5. Crossing. The precise location in a 5-year-old's life where they lose their humanity, health, and livelihood. The site where the child realizes their guiding spirit is weakening, the body changing, the mind confused, the flesh shivering, eyes watering, digits dancing. The site where Americans will blame the child for infecting the American dream. The site where a child is just a child visiting occupied Indian land. 6. The black body does not migrate. It is shipped. Tavia Nyong'o. 7. American, I guess I'll be forever sick. Another thing I wanted to mention is back to the idea of tonal languages, that it's interesting how Lopez uses the slash line to create boundaries throughout their text. But the slash lines also give pauses that create this kind of rhythmic effect while reading. And so as one's reading, it kind of gives this kind of different musicality to the words. And just as similar to Lara's work, using language and using the rhythm of language and the musicality of language and the plurality of language to create these other worlds, but also to remember past worlds before the colonization, before this policing of the body, of the Black body, of the Indian body, all of that, right? The recognition of a previous wholeness of being before one becomes sick in America. So glitch language for me allows these multiple possibilities of past selves, of current selves outside of these kind of standardized ways of being in language and as a body. And
their machines repaired and arcades are also experiencing a surge.
Well, an endangered white rhino has just given birth
go
at
back
Disney's
to
Animal
the
Kingdom.
PowerPoint.
The baby weighing in at a cool 150 pounds. There he is, hanging out with mom. Mom sends candy.
So for today's prompt, I want you to glitch the code. I want you to take a poem from a well-known poet, and I want you to glitch the language of that poem to either sound like your own languages from your cultural background or to include words from the languages from your background. And if you do come up with something, please feel free to share it. Here you can find information for my mobile library project, J Expressions, as well as Jam Journal, which is a literary platform for experimental and innovative writing and text art that will be launching on November 15th at 7 p.m. We'll be having a launch reading. And you can, of course, sign up for the J Expressions newsletter for more information. And you can follow me on Twitter and IG. And if you would like to donate to the production of Jam Journal, as well as the continuation of J Expressions, feel free to use PayPal, Venmo, or Cash App. And the next workshop will be looking at Claudia Rankine's Citizen. We'll be looking at a few poems from that book. And so stay tuned for details for that. And thank you so much for joining me today. And have a great rest of your day. Bye.